June 10, 1944, near Carentan, France. Rain drizzled through the hedgerows as the last German machine gun sputtered and fell silent. The smell of wet earth, cordite, and burned canvas hung thick in the air. From the smoke emerged a column of exhausted German officers, mud-smeared, hollow-eyed, their once proud uniforms tattered and streaked with blood. An American paratrooper from the 101st Airborne lowered his Thompson. "That's it. Hands up. Boys' war's over for you," he said, his voice calm but firm. The Germans raised their arms, stepping out into the open field. Among them was Hauptmann Erich Feldmann, a veteran officer from the 352nd Infantry Division. He was tall, sharp-faced, and tired beyond measure. For 3 days, his men had eaten nothing but black bread and strips of horse meat boiled over a campfire. Their rations, if one could call them, that had long since spoiled in the summer heat. Now, as Feldman surrendered his pistol and cap, his stomach turned not from fear, but from hunger. American soldiers searched the prisoners, disarming them and leading them toward a nearby farm, converted into a temporary holding area. There, in the barn, the prisoners were lined up under the watch of a young lieutenant. Outside, the smell of something foreign drifted in on the rain. It wasn't smoke or manure. It was food, real food. The kind Feldman hadn't smelled in months. He turned his head just enough to see a group of American infantrymen squatting beside their jeeps, passing around small metal tins that steamed in the drizzle. They laughed, talked, and ate from their helmets, spooning thick stew and tearing open bars of chocolate. One soldier offered a cigarette to another and poured something hot from a small green packet into a tin cup. The aroma hit Feldman like a blow. Coffee, rich, strong, impossible. Behind him, one of his fellow officers whispered, "Mein Gott, they eat like officers." Feldman said nothing, but his eyes narrowed as he watched a privateer open a can of beef and dip bread into it. In the mud of Normandy, the Americans were feasting calmly, efficiently, as if hunger had never existed. For the first time, Feldman felt something unexpected. Not hatred, not envy, but confusion. How could men fight so hard and still eat like that? June 11th, 1944 amperes, captured farmstead outside Carentan. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of mud and metal. Inside the makeshift holding barn, dozens of German officers sat quietly, their wet uniforms clinging to them. The door creaked open, and 2 American MPs stepped inside, carrying crates. "Lunchtime, gentlemen," one of them said with a grin. They began handing out small packages, olive drab boxes, each neatly labeled U.S. Army Field Ration. "See." The Germans looked at them skeptically. The boxes were light, square, and unassuming. No loaf of bread, no slab of dried sausage, just cardboard and tin. Hauptmann Erich Feldman turned his over in his hands. The label read, "Beef and vegetable stew." He frowned. "In a can," he muttered in disbelief. The younger officer beside him, Oberleutnant Weiss, pried his open with the edge of his knife. A hiss of pressure escaped, and steam rose from the meat inside. The rich scent of beef, potatoes, and carrots filled the air. Every German head turned at once. One by one, they opened their small tins of canned fruit, biscuits, chocolate bars, instant coffee, chewing gum. Even a packet labeled cigarettes, 20, sat neatly in each box. Weiss blinked in amazement. "This is food for the front line?" A nearby American guard chuckled. "Breakfast, lunch, or dinner, all in one box." Feldman stared at his meal, the realization dawning slowly. These men weren't just fed, they were supplied, sustained, and comforted. The tin in his hand wasn't merely food, it was evidence of an industrial miracle. He took a cautious bite. The meat was soft, seasoned, real. For a moment he closed his eyes and tasted civilization. Around him, the other officers whispered among themselves. "Do you realize what this means?" said Weiss. "They can feed entire armies like this, anywhere, anytime." Feldman nodded. "We have field kitchens that burn down when the trucks run out of petrol. They have this, in a box. Outside, the Americans were finishing their own meals, laughing and tossing empty tins into a pile that glittered like silver under the grey sky. A sergeant brewed coffee over a small stove, the aroma drifting through the open door. Feldman inhaled deeply. "Coffee," he said softly. "Real coffee. We haven't seen any since 42. No." One of the guards, hearing him, smiled and reached into his jacket. He pulled out a spare packet of instant coffee and tossed it over. "Here. Welcome to America." The German stared as Feldman caught it in midair, a simple brown packet marked Nescafé, 1 serving. He looked down at it as if holding treasure. For the first time since the invasion began, the officers didn't think of tactics or maps. They thought of warmth, of taste, of what it meant to feel human again, all delivered in tin cans and cardboard boxes. War had taught them fear and hunger. But this was a new kind of weapon, comfort. June 12, 1944, the captured barn near Carentan, Normandy. Dawn broke grey and silent over the fields. The prisoners were allowed to step outside for morning roll call, guarded by a ring of GIs smoking and joking in the early light. Across the yard, a small American field kitchen rattled to life, sending up a column of fragrant steam. The smell made every German's stomach twist. Hauptmann Erich Feldman stood near the fence, his hands behind his back, watching the Americans work. One man stirred a pot, another ladled hot stew into tin mess kits, and another passed out packages of ration biscuits and powdered eggs. Every movement was smooth, practiced, efficient. Behind him, Oberleutnant Weiss muttered, "They eat like they've already won the war." Feldman turned his head. "Maybe they have." Weiss frowned, holding his last scrap of black bread hard as stone, speckled with mold. "We were told they were weak, spoiled, dependent on machines." Oh, Feldman's gaze shifted back to the steaming American kitchen. "They are dependent on machines that work." Nearby, one of the guards set down a crate of rations, opening it for inventory. Inside were tins of meat, biscuits, sugar, coffee packets, even small bars of chocolate wrapped in foil. Feldman knelt closer, his curiosity overpowering his pride. "Beef stew," he read softly. "Bacon and beans. Ham and eggs. Fruit salad." He looked up at the guard. "These are for soldiers?" The guard smirked. "Yup, we got 10 million guys eating the same thing from Italy to the Pacific. 10 million. Feldman repeated, stunned. The number echoed in his mind, not just 10 million men, but 10 million meals, every day, delivered across oceans and battlefields. In his coat pocket, his own field ration crumbled between his fingers, a few ounces of bread, a slice of smoked horsemeat, and a lump of sugar saved from 2 days before. That was what the Reich called strength. He whispered under his breath, "We march on hunger, they march on abundance." At noon, the Americans distributed another round of sea rations to the prisoners, not out of mercy, but procedure. Each German received a can of meat, a small chocolate bar, biscuits and coffee powder. Weiss sat on the ground, poking the can with his knife. "Canned beef," he said.
Move up, keep low.
For them, ordinary. For us, a miracle. He took a bite and shook his head. "Do you taste that, Eric? Salt, pepper, they even season it." Feldman nodded slowly, spoon in hand. "It's not just about feeding soldiers. It's about reminding them they're still men." The others murmured in agreement, some even smiling weakly as they ate the first real meal in days. Later, when the guards collected the empties, Feldman noticed something striking. The American tins weren't discarded carelessly. Each soldier crushed his can flat and stacked it neatly in a pile. Waste wasn't tolerated. Everything had order. He thought about the chaos back home, the shortages, the endless scavenging, the false promises of victory. In the American army, even food was discipline. That night, as rain drummed softly against the barn roof, Feldman scribbled in his pocket notebook by candlelight. "They fight with factories as much as rifles. Their food is a weapon comfort against despair. Every can is a message. You are cared for. You will endure. We were never fed such faith. Weiss rolled over, half asleep. Still writing, Eric? Yes, Feldman whispered. Someday someone will want to know how they won, and I will tell them it began with what they ate. Outside, the night smelled faintly of coffee and beef, stew the scent of victory in the simplest form imaginable. June 13th, 1944 temporary POW camp, outskirts of Carentan. Morning mist rolled low across the fields, turning everything pale grey except the olive-green shapes moving through it. American supply trucks, their tires hissing over the wet road. From where they stood behind the wire, the German officers watched in silence as the trucks unloaded more crates marked Rations US Army. The sheer quantity was staggering. Dozens of boxes, stacked with mechanical precision, each labeled, counted, recorded. The Americans worked without hurry, but without pause, a rhythm that felt almost inhuman in its consistency. Hauptmann Erich Feldman leaned against the fence, his fingers resting on the cold wire. They never run out, he murmured. Bread, meat, sugar, coffee, it flows like water. Behind him, Oberleutnant Weiss laughed bitterly. In our army, even the water comes with orders. A guard nearby overheard and smirked. You boys need anything? We've got more where that came from. He tossed over a small green packet, chocolate D ration, 600 calories. Feldman caught it. The block was hard as a rock, bitter when he bit into it, but it was pure energy, concentrated comfort. He looked at the writing stamped into the wrapper. Eat slowly. Sustain strength. He exhaled through his nose, almost smiling. They think of everything, he said, even how fast a man should eat. Weiss sat beside him in the mud, cradling his tin mug of reconstituted coffee. It's more than food, he said. It's how do you say psychology? Feldman nodded slowly. Yes. It tells them they matter, that their command expects them to live, not just fight. He glanced toward the Americans beyond the fence, laughing, writing letters, heating their breakfast with portable stoves.
Keep low.
Even under shell fire, they managed warmth and routine. It wasn't luxury, it was stability. Later that afternoon, a Red Cross inspector arrived, a polite Swiss officer who walked between the guards and prisoners, making notes. When he reached Feldman's group, he asked gently, "You are treated well." Feldman gestured toward the ration tin beside him. "Better than we treated our own men, I think." The Swiss officer nodded. Food tells a great deal about a nation. It is culture condensed. After he left, Feldman couldn't stop thinking about the remark. Culture condensed. It echoed through his mind as the sun dipped behind the hedgerows. When the Americans brought dinner, more tins, more biscuits, even a slice of fruitcake from some distant factory in New Jersey, the Germans ate quietly. No one complained. No one compared it to home anymore. Weiss broke the silence first. "Do you think they know what this means to us?" Feldman wiped his hands on his sleeve. "No. But they know what it means to them. It means they're never forgotten." He looked at the can in his hand, its dull metal glinting in the fading light, and felt an unexpected sting of emotion. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like an expendable cog in a failing machine. He felt human. As darkness fell, he wrote another line in his notebook. "The taste of victory is not glory, it is warmth, salt, and sugar. They have learned how to feed hope itself." Outside the wire, an American mess sergeant poured hot coffee into tin cups, handing them to men who joked as if the war were already half won. Feldman watched them and whispered, "They fight on full stomachs, Hans. We fight on faith." Weiss answered softly, "And faith doesn't boil water." The two men sat in silence, their empty cans glinting beside them, quiet witnesses to a truth too simple to deny. In modern war, comfort was power. June 15th, 1944, the hedgerow country south of Carentan. The POW camp had settled into routine. The Americans were pushing inland, their trucks roaring day and night. while behind the lines, the captured Germans were slowly realizing that the war they thought they understood was not the war their enemies were fighting. Hauptmann Erich Feldman woke to the sound of rain on canvas and the smell of something cooking. Not the burnt horse fat or bitter barley soup he'd grown used to. This was thick, savory, almost sweet. Through the open flap of the tent, he could see an American mess crew at work. A row of portable stoves, steam hissing from coffee pots, soldiers laughing as they opened crates of food. Even in mud and drizzle, they moved like men with energy to spare. Weiss crawled out beside him, buttoning his tunic. "It smells like a restaurant," he muttered. "It smells like home," Feldman corrected quietly. Moments later, an American guard arrived, carrying 2 cans and 2 spoons. "Breakfast for the officers," he said with a grin, setting the tins down. "Eggs and bacon, real stuff." The men looked at him blankly. Eggs and bacon? In a can? When he left, they pried the lids open. Inside, steam rose from scrambled eggs mixed with strips of bacon and small cubes of potato. Feldman stared for a moment, then took a bite. The warmth hit his stomach like sunlight after a storm. For the first time since his capture, he felt full, not stuffed, just satisfied. Across from him, Weiss was speechless, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Eric," he whispered, "how do they do it? How do they feed millions of men like this?" Feldman shook his head slowly. "Industry. Planning. Faith in their factories. Not just their Führer." He set the can down, looking at the label. "Packed by the H.J. Heinz Company, Pittsburgh, PA. Not a military arsenal, a civilian name. A brand that had fed families before it fed armies. Do you see?" he said softly. "Their entire nation fights with them. Not by command, by contribution." Weiss leaned back, thinking of the propaganda speeches. The endless orders from Berlin demanding sacrifice while ration books shrank to nothing. "Our people starve," he said, "and theirs send dessert. At noon, another delivery arrived. Small packets of biscuits and something the Germans had never seen: powdered lemonade. Feldman mixed it with water and took a cautious sip. It was tart, cold, refreshing. He smiled despite himself. One of the younger officers nearby joked, "Maybe this is how they win, they make the war taste better." The laughter that followed wasn't bitter this time, it was hollow, reflective. Later that evening, Feldman watched through the fence as American soldiers shared cigarettes and opened tins by the light of their lanterns. One man pulled out a small bar of chocolate, snapped it in half, and handed the rest to a comrade. In that moment, Feldman understood something his training had never taught him: that morale wasn't just slogans or parades. It was care, consistency, and small comforts that reminded a man why he fought. He spoke quietly to Weiss, his voice heavy with realization. "We built fear into our soldiers. They built familiarity into theirs. We fed obedience. They feed loyalty." Weiss nodded, staring into the dark. "And maybe," he said, "that's why they're still laughing out there, and we're sitting in here." Feldman said nothing. He picked up the empty can beside him, its edges catching the faint glow of a distant campfire. It wasn't just food anymore, it was evidence of something larger, a civilization that knew how to sustain both body and spirit. He ran his thumb along the metal rim and whispered, "This is how empires are built now, one meal at a time." Outside, the laughter of the Americans rolled through the camp like a song, and for the first time, the sound didn't sting. It humbled him. June 17, 1944, near Saint-Lô, Normandy. The fields around the camp trembled with the constant rumble of artillery. Distant flashes rolled across the horizon like storms that never ended. Yet inside the American rear lines, the rhythm of supply never faltered. Convoys rolled in, trucks unloaded, kitchens lit their burners, and men ate, laughed, and marched again. Behind the wire, Hauptmann Erich Feldman watched it all unfold with the quiet fascination of a man studying a force of nature. He had fought across Europe, Poland, Russia, and now France, but he had never seen an army fed like this. Every morning before sunrise, long lines of American soldiers queued for breakfast. Eggs, beans, coffee, even fruit juice appeared like magic. There were no panicked ration lines, no chaos. Each man knew he would be fed, and that was enough to make him stand straighter, fight harder, and smile through the rain. Oberleutnant Weiss leaned against the fence beside him. "They eat like civilians," he said. "Not like soldiers." Feldman shook his head. "No, they eat. So they can be soldiers." He turned to watch a truck labeled Quartermaster Corps, US Army unload crates by the dozen. The men worked in rhythm, calling out weights and counts. One of the guards noticed the Germans watching and smirked. "Logistics, gentlemen. That's how you win a war." Weiss frowned. "Not tanks, not planes." The guard shrugged. "Can't run tanks on empty stomachs." End quote. When the guard walked away, Feldman let out a slow breath. "He's right," he said. "Our generals worship machines and iron. Theirs worship organization." That afternoon, the Americans distributed rations to the prisoners again. This time, the officers received something new. K-rations. Compact boxes tied with string. Inside were crackers, canned cheese, dried fruit, and a small envelope labeled Instant Coffee, Type I. Weiss opened his, studying each item. "Everything thought out, everything measured," he said. "Even the matches. Look, they include matches." Feldman nodded. "A soldier's life, pre-packed. All he has to do is survive long enough to open it." They ate in silence, each bite heavy with the weight of realization. Around them, the camp was quiet except for the sound of chewing and the faint hiss of boiling water. The air smelled faintly of cocoa and cigarettes, small luxuries that had become normal to the enemy. Feldman stared at the can in his hands. "Do you know what this means, Hans?" he said softly. "This isn't about food. It's about morale as a system. Every tin, every biscuit, every cup of coffee, it's a promise. You will not be forgotten." Weiss chuckled bitterly. "We give our men slogans. They give theirs breakfast." That night, as the rain returned, Feldman wrote by candlelight in his battered notebook. "They fight with factories instead of speeches. Their comfort is their courage. Each meal they eat is another victory over despair. We have none of this, and we wonder why we lose." The candle flickered as he closed the book. Across the yard, American soldiers were finishing their dinner, the glow of their lanterns reflecting off clean tin cups. Their laughter carried across the night like a language. The Germans no longer spoke the sound of men who believed they would see home again. Feldman whispered into the dark, "They're not feeding armies. They're feeding faith." And in that moment, he finally understood what the Reich's leaders never had. That wars are not only won with guns or courage, but with the quiet, relentless certainty of a hot meal waiting at the end of the day. The next morning, when the guards came with breakfast, Weiss smiled faintly and said, "Gentlemen, the enemy's greatest weapon is hospitality." The Americans laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Feldman didn't laugh. He knew it was the truth. June 20, 1944, Allied POW compound, near Saint-Lô. Summer had settled over Normandy in a haze of heat and smoke. Each day the thunder of artillery rolled farther east, and each evening the sky glowed orange from distant fires. But inside the barbed wire fences, another kind of transformation was happening, quiet, human, and deeply humbling. The German officers were changing. Hauptmann Erich Feldman sat beneath a willow tree, his tunic unbuttoned, a notebook on his knees. Around him, his fellow officers were scattered across the yard, eating from the olive-drab tins that had become as familiar to them as their own mess kits. The Americans brought meals 3 times a day, punctual as clockwork: coffee at sunrise, stew at noon, biscuits, fruit, and chocolate by dusk. Feldman had stopped thinking of it as charity. It was method. Weiss joined him, lighting a cigarette one of the guards had traded for a pair of insignia pins. "You know," he said, exhaling, "our propaganda told us the Americans were soft, that they couldn't endure hardship." Feldman smiled faintly. "They don't endure it. They eliminate it. And that's their genius." From beyond the wire came the steady rhythm of trucks, hundreds of them. rolling toward the front. Each one bore the same stenciled marking: U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps. The endless convoy of logistics, food, and supplies had become the background noise of Allied victory. Weiss watched the line disappear down the road. "Every one of those trucks carries hope," he said. "We carried fear." Feldman nodded slowly. "We believed discipline was obedience. They believe discipline is trust. You see it even in their rations. They trust that every man, from the lowest private to the highest general, will receive the same." A nearby guard overheard and chuckled. "That's about right," he said. "Everybody gets the same chow, except officers. They just get to eat it first if they're lucky." Weiss laughed, shaking his head. "In our army, the officers eat instead." The guard grinned. "Maybe that's why you're over there and we're over here." When he walked away, Feldman stared after him for a long moment. "Hans," he said quietly, "do you realize what we're witnessing? This isn't just an army. It's a civilization at war." Weiss flicked away his cigarette. "And it fights with kindness." No. Later that afternoon, Feldman joined the work detail distributing empty ration tins for recycling. The Americans insisted the metal be cleaned and sorted. Nothing went to waste. Standing over the piles of gleaming aluminum, Feldman marveled at their efficiency. "Even scraps become strategy," he muttered. He ran his fingers along one of the flattened lids. Beef and noodles, peas and carrots. Fruit cocktail. Each label bore the name of a city: Chicago, Boston, street, Louis, places he'd never seen but could now imagine. Factories roaring with assembly lines, women sealing cans, men loading trains, all of America, feeding its sons across an ocean. That night, while the other prisoners slept, Feldman wrote again in his small notebook, "They will not lose because they refuse to let a single man feel forgotten. Their strength lies not in what they eat, but in what it tells them, that they belong to something vast, steady, and dependable." He closed the book and listened to the distant hum of engines, the unending pulse of American logistics. In the silence between each rumble, he realized that what separated the two sides was not bravery or ideology. It was belief that comfort was not weakness, but armor. He whispered into the dark, "They understand the human machine better than we ever did." And somewhere far beyond the wire, another convoy rolled through the night, carrying cans, chocolate, and coffee fuel for an army that was already winning tomorrow's battles before dawn broke. June 24th, 1944, Normandy countryside, now firmly in Allied hands. The POW compound had grown quiet, no longer tense with the anger and humiliation of recent capture. The men were thinner, yes, but their eyes no longer burned with defiance. They were thinking men again, not cogs in a collapsing machine. That morning, the Americans had delivered a new shipment of rations. Among the crates were tins marked Ration, Type D, Emergency Chocolate Bar. Each prisoner received one square. At first, the Germans hesitated, instinctively suspicious of generosity. But as soon as the first bite melted on their tongues, silence fell across the camp. It wasn't the sweetness that struck them. It was the precision, the texture, the calorie density, the way the label explained exactly what it was for. To provide high energy and prevent fatigue under extreme conditions. Every word was thought through, every crumb serving a purpose. Hauptmann Erich Feldman broke his piece in half and handed one to Weiss. "They think of their soldiers like engineers think of engines," he said. "Every man fueled, every motion calculated." Weiss nodded, chewing slowly. "Our army would call this indulgence." Feldman smiled faintly. "And theirs calls it insurance." Later that afternoon, an American quartermaster officer, a captain with a Kansas drawl, entered the camp, accompanied by an interpreter. He wanted to inspect how the German prisoners were managing their supplies. When he reached Feldman's group, he found them sitting neatly beside their stack of empty tins, sorted by size and type. The captain grinned. "You boys are organized. Guess we're rubbing off on you." Feldman rose and saluted out of habit. "May I ask a question, Captain?" "Sure," the American replied. "Why do you give us the same food as your own men?" The captain tilted his head, almost surprised. "Because it's what we have. We don't make prison food and soldier food. Logistics doesn't care about uniforms, just numbers." Weiss translated softly, then looked up at Feldman. "Numbers," he murmured. "They build everything on numbers." Feldman nodded, but his eyes stayed on the captain. "You must understand, Captain, in our army, there would be nothing left for prisoners." The American shrugged. "Maybe that's why your men fought so hard they were starving. Ours fight because they know supper's coming." It was said casually, but it struck Feldman like a blow. He watched as the captain turned away, clipboard in hand, barking cheerful orders to his men. That evening, as dusk fell, Feldman gathered the other officers around a small table made from scrap wood. He placed a row of empty ration tins in front of them. "Gentlemen," he began, "each of these cans is an idea that our Reich never understood." Weiss frowned. "What do you mean?" Feldman tapped the tins one by one. "Efficiency. Standardization. Compassion disguised as practicality. Every American eats this same meal, no matter his rank. That equality breeds loyalty. That loyalty builds endurance. And endurance, gentlemen." He paused, his gaze steady. "Endurance wins wars." The men were silent. Outside, the hum of engines continued as another convoy rolled toward the front. Weiss finally spoke. "So you think they'll win?" Feldman's expression softened. "They've already won, Hans. We just haven't signed the papers yet." He looked again at the tins glinting under the lamplight. "These aren't just rations. They are symbols of what happens when a nation feeds not only its soldiers, but its spirit." Later, when the guards collected the scraps, Feldman kept one can for himself, a small, dented tin that had once held beef and vegetables. He cleaned it carefully and tucked it into his pack. Years later, he would still have it not as a souvenir of defeat, but as a reminder of understanding. That in the mud of France, a tin can had taught him more about victory than all the speeches of Berlin ever could. June 28th, 1944, the Pau camp, west of Saint-Lô. Thunder rolled again over Normandy. The distant front was now a constant drumbeat of Allied progress tanks grinding forward, artillery thundering from dawn till dusk. Yet behind the wire, amid the hum of trucks and the smell of coffee, a strange calm had settled over the captured German officers. By now, the Americans trusted them enough to assign light labor sorting crates, cleaning equipment, organizing empty tins for recycling. It wasn't punishment. It was routine, order, and quiet dignity, something the Germans had not felt in months. Hauptmann Erich Feldman was working near a supply tent when he first saw it. An American quartermaster's ledger, left open on a table. He couldn't read every word, but the numbers stopped him cold. Columns and columns, tens of thousands of tons of food, distributed daily to units across France. He leaned closer. The figures told a story more terrifying than any tank or bomber could. 400,000 rations today, he murmured. 500,000 tomorrow. Weiss appeared beside him, wiping his hands on a rag. For the entire front? Feldman shook his head. For one army group. He straightened slowly, realizing the full weight of what he was seeing. They feed an army the size of a continent and still have enough left for their prisoners. Were. Nearby, American soldiers laughed as they stacked crates labeled Ration, Type B, breakfast units. The smell of roasted coffee beans drifted through the tent. One private offered a mug to a guard, saying, "Can't fight a war without this stuff." Feldman turned to Weiss. "Do you remember in Russia, when our men ate sawdust bread, when the quartermasters vanished, and the only warmth was from burning maps?" Weiss nodded, his eyes heavy.
Keep moving!
"I remember."
Tracks!
"Now look at them," Feldman said. "Their rations are not just food. They are a message. You matter. You will eat. You will come home. That is how they keep morale unbroken." The guard returned, noticing their interest, and grinned. "You boys curious about our chow line?" Feldman hesitated, then asked, "How do you make so much of it?" Every day? The guard shrugged. We got factories that don't sleep. Same machines that used to can peaches back home now pack beans and beef for us. My sister runs one of them. No, that simple sentence my sister runs. One of them hit Feldman harder than any speech. In the German Reich, war was built on sacrifice, silence, and fear. But here, even civilians were part of the rhythm, not out of terror, but cooperation. Later that evening, as rain pattered softly on the canvas tents, Feldman wrote again in his notebook, "Our leaders taught us that hardship builds strength. The Americans have learned that comfort builds endurance. And in the long war, endurance is the greater weapon." He looked up, watching the guards by the fire. One strummed a guitar. Another brewed coffee over a small flame. The song was soft, almost cheerful, an American folk tune carried over the crackle of rain. Weiss listened beside him. "Do you hear that, Eric? They sing before battle. We used to whisper prayers." Feldman nodded slowly. "That is their secret. They remember life, even in war." Oh. As the song drifted across the night, he closed his notebook and whispered to himself, "This war is not just about who fights harder. It's about who fights happier." The next morning, when the rations arrived, Feldman looked at the tin in his hand, stamped, "Prepared by Armour and Co. Chicago." He smiled faintly and said to Weiss, "You can taste their cities in every bite." And though the thunder of artillery never ceased, for the first time in years, the German officers felt they had witnessed something far greater than victory or defeat, the industrial heartbeat of a free people who had turned food, comfort and unity into their greatest weapon. May 1946 Munich, Germany. The war was over. The ruins smoked no more, but the silence they left behind was deafening. The Grand Reich that had promised glory lay in ash and hunger. Cities were hollow skeletons, the roads crowded with refugees, the countryside bare. In the courtyard of a requisitioned Allied depot, former Wehrmacht officer Erich Feldman stood in line with civilians, his uniform long replaced by a patched coat. Ahead of him, an American sergeant was handing out food. Not lectures, not slogans, just boxes marked U.S. Army ration, relief. When it was his turn, Feldman accepted a crate with both hands. It was olive drab, stamped with a white star. Inside were tins of canned beef, powdered milk, chocolate, coffee, and biscuits. Exactly what he had once eaten behind barbed wire as a prisoner. For a long moment, he didn't move. The smell, the labels, even the typeface brought him back to Normandy, to that rain-soaked camp where he and Weiss had first realized the truth hidden inside a can of stew. An American relief worker noticed him staring. "You all right, sir?" she asked gently. Feldman nodded. "Yes, it's just strange. Once, this was the food of my enemy." The woman smiled. "Then I guess your enemy knew how to cook." He laughed softly, the sound brittle but sincere. He took out a tin of coffee, opened it, and inhaled the rich aroma. For the first time in months, he felt warmth that wasn't from a fire. Later that evening, he carried the box home through streets still broken by war. Weiss was waiting in the small apartment they shared, a candle flickering on the table. "You found food?" Weiss asked, standing quickly. Feldman nodded, setting the crate down. "American rations, the same ones." Weiss froze. "After everything, they're still feeding us." Yes," Feldman said quietly, pulling out a can opener. "They win the same way they fight, by making sure no one goes hungry." The two men ate in silence. The canned beef was warm and hearty, the coffee rich. For a moment, the bombed-out room felt almost normal. When they were done, Feldman picked up one of the tins and turned it over in his hands. The label read, "Packed by Heinz, Pittsburgh, PA." He traced the letters with his thumb, as though memorizing them. "Do you remember what we said in Normandy?" he asked softly. "That they fight on comfort, and we fight on fear?" Weiss nodded. "We were right. And now they rebuild with the same comfort." Feldman smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's the lesson we keep." He reached for his old notebook, its pages yellowed and warped from war. Opening it, he added one last entry beneath his earlier words. The power of a nation lies not only in its weapons, but in its ability to nourish body and soul alike. The Americans taught us that morale is not noise, it is warmth that never runs out. When he closed the notebook, the city outside was quiet. In the distance, the lights of Allied trucks flickered like fireflies carrying food, not ammunition. Feldman looked out the window and whispered to Weiss, "Once their tins humbled us. Now, they keep us alive." Weiss smiled tiredly. "Perhaps that's victory too." Feldman nodded, his gaze distant. "No, that's civilization." He placed the empty can on the windowsill, its dull metal reflecting the candlelight. In that small glow, surrounded by ruins, the lesson of Normandy lived on that the real strength of an army and a nation was not how much it could destroy, but how much it could feed.